Every day, we see the darker side of the world around us. We witness how people can hurt others in ways that are hard to understand. It's a sad part of life, but it's something we can't ignore. As someone who dives into the world of crime, I'm here to share the most shocking stories and try to understand what drives people to do such things. I'm Michael, and today, I've got another unreal true crime story for you. On the evening of April 19th, 2002, Greg Allen dropped off his 4-year-old daughter, Sabrina, for a weekend visit with her mother. As he hugged her goodbye, she held onto him tightly and whispered that her stomach hurt, just like it always did when she had to stay with her mom. Greg reassured her, smiled, and promised he'd be back to pick her up soon. But when Sunday arrived, Sabrina never came home. Greg waited. He called. He drove to the address his ex-wife, Dara Lawrence, had given him, only to find out it was fake. Sabrina had vanished. As panic set in, one terrifying thought kept running through his mind. Would he ever see his daughter again? Sabrina Allen was born on May 30th, 1997, in Austin, Texas, the only child of Dara Lawrence and Greg Allen. While details about her early childhood are scarce, it is known that she grew up in a family marked by emotional and legal challenges. Dara had difficulty holding a steady job, often working in sales, but rarely keeping a position for more than 6 months. Greg, an electrical engineer and sonar expert, was deeply involved in research for his doctoral studies at the University of Texas in Austin. Sabrina attended daycare, where her teachers adored her. They described her as an energetic and lively child who loved chasing pigeons. She was outgoing, always eager to talk to people of all ages. During that time, she formed a close friendship with a girl her age, Celeste Chavez. The two were inseparable, spending almost every afternoon and weekend together, much to the delight of their parents, who encouraged their bond. They especially enjoyed dressing up as Disney princesses, and one of Celeste's fondest memories was from Halloween in 2001 when they dressed as Snow White and Belle to go trick-or-treating. However, Sabrina's happy and carefree childhood took a drastic turn when her parents separated. Their divorce marked a major shift in her life. After the split, Dara accused Greg of child abuse, while Sabrina, in an interview with a child protection officer, claimed that her father was violent and had physically harmed her mother. But as the investigation unfolded, inconsistencies in their statements began to surface. When questioned separately, Sabrina broke down in tears and revealed a shocking truth. Her mother had manipulated her into making false accusations. Faced with this revelation, along with other evidence gathered during the investigation, the court ordered a psychological evaluation of Dara. The results indicated that she suffered from a personality disorder. As a result, a judge ruled that Greg would retain full custody of Sabrina, while Dara was granted supervised visitation rights. However, this decision only escalated tensions. Dara frequently threatened to take Sabrina away, and visitation disputes became common. Greg reported these issues to the court, but officials stated they could not intervene beyond the established custody arrangements. By early 2002, something changed. Between March and April, Dara stopped arguing over custody and suddenly seemed more cooperative and content. Greg, relieved by what he believed was a positive shift, lowered his guard. But what he didn't realize was that beneath this apparent calm, Dara was putting together a plan that would have devastating consequences. There were warning signs, but Greg failed to recognize them. One particularly alarming moment occurred when Sabrina told her paternal grandmother that she was going to live with her mother in Mexico. Though surprised, the family dismissed it as a child's misunderstanding. Greg noticed Dara seemed nervous, but he clung to the hope that her newfound friendliness was genuine. Then came April 19th, the weekend of Dara's scheduled visitation. Greg dropped Sabrina off, kissed her goodbye, and reassured her when she anxiously reminded him not to forget to pick her up. According to later reports, Sabrina would often complain of stomach aches whenever she had to stay with her mother. This visit, however, was different. For reasons that remain unclear, there was no supervision as mandated by the court. When the weekend ended and Sabrina was supposed to return home, neither she nor Dara showed up. Greg waited for hours, his worry growing with each passing minute. Finally, he decided to go to the address Dara had provided. But upon arriving, he was met with a chilling realization. The address was fake. Dara had taken Sabrina against court orders. Greg immediately reported the abduction, but he encountered an infuriating obstacle. The local police were slow to act, as cases of missing children in custody disputes were not always prioritized. As a result, law enforcement delayed issuing an official alert. It wasn't until April 29th that a state warrant for Dara's arrest was issued by the Travis County District Court. By May, authorities escalated their efforts, charging her with unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. On May 10th, a federal arrest warrant was also filed against her, suspecting that she had fled the country with Sabrina. By then, investigators believed Dara had successfully escaped the country and had taken her daughter to Mexico, beginning a desperate search that would span years. Between 1999 and 2009, official reports from the Government Accountability Office of Congress estimated that at least 6,000 children were illegally taken to foreign countries by one of their parents, all of whom were U.S. residents. Among them were children taken while one parent was serving in the U.S. military. Unfortunately, only a small percentage of these children were ever able to return to their home country. In most cases, the abductions involved Mexico, and the lack of coordination between authorities made the situation worse. At that time, there was no national database of custody orders issued by U.S. courts to help immigration officials determine the legal status of a child leaving the country. Even if such documents had been available, international airlines typically had less than 30 minutes to cross-check passenger lists against missing child reports or court orders prohibiting travel. After Sabrina Allen's forced disappearance, Greg Allen was devastated. As he described it, he went from being a devoted single father whose life revolved around raising his daughter to feeling like a parent who had been abandoned, his entire purpose in life ripped away. He lost all contact with Sabrina and embarked on an exhaustive, desperate search to find her. While the police began piecing together the case, Greg took matters into his own hands, hiring specialists in search and rescue. Investigators soon discovered that Dara had enlisted the help of an acquaintance from work who drove her and Sabrina to a bus station. There, she purchased a ticket with cash to avoid leaving a trace. The two then boarded a bus, which initially took them to Laredo, a border city in southern Texas. At the time, border regulations did not require parents to present documentation for children crossing with them, making it easy for Dara to take Sabrina into Mexico without leaving any official records. While authorities searched for a missing 5-year-old girl with blonde hair, fair skin, and brown eyes, Dara was already taking steps to ensure they wouldn't be found. She altered Sabrina's appearance frequently, by cutting and changing her hair, making identification nearly impossible. The two lived on the move for years, passing through various unknown locations under different identities. Since Sabrina did not speak Spanish, she could not attend school, leaving no educational records to track. Eventually, she was enrolled in a preschool in Felix Cuevas, where she learned to read and write in Spanish. However, her status as an undocumented immigrant and her mother's refusal to provide any identification prevented her from being formally registered in the Mexican education system. As a result, she spent years without attending school. Despite law enforcement's efforts, Greg continued his own investigation. In 2003, he came agonizingly close to finding his daughter. Just before Father's Day, he received an email from a man claiming to have had contact with a child matching Sabrina's description. The sender was one of Sabrina's teachers who had been deeply moved by an interaction with the little girl. She had cried in his arms, speaking very little Spanish and struggling to communicate with her classmates. Frustrated and isolated, she sought comfort in adults rather than other children. When the teacher expressed kindness toward her, Sabrina broke down even further. Through her tears, she admitted that she missed her father. The teacher was shocked. Until then, he had believed Sabrina and her mother were alone. As their conversation continued, the girl slowly opened up despite her lingering fear. She revealed that she and her mother were living under false identities. Dara was now Blanca, while Sabrina had been given the name Adriana. How Dara obtained these false identities remained a mystery. Through trembling words, Sabrina confessed that she did have a father named Greg who lived in Texas. She shared her real name and, with desperation in her eyes, pleaded for help in finding him. She even mentioned that her dad had a picture of her online. After verifying her story, the unnamed teacher contacted Greg, expressing his belief that Sabrina was suffering under her mother's care. The information left Greg overwhelmed with a mixture of hope and anxiety. His daughter was in a school just 30 minutes away from where he was at that moment. Yet, despite the urgency of the situation, he knew he couldn't act alone. Legal procedures had to be followed, so he immediately alerted the police and the U.S. Embassy. However, the long-awaited rescue operation ended in devastating failure. By the time authorities arrived, Dara had already vanished with Sabrina. In an almost surreal display of speed and precision, she managed to escape, once again disappearing without a trace, leaving Greg heartbroken and back at square one. Time, bureaucracy, and endless paperwork worked against Greg, allowing Dara to evade authorities once again. Desperate to find his daughter, Greg traveled to Mexico multiple times and even began learning Spanish in hopes of conducting his own search. The language teacher he hired, a woman named Mariana, was deeply moved by his story. She not only helped him with the language, but also became his ally in the search for Sabrina. Over time, their connection grew into something more, and they eventually started a relationship that led to marriage. Together, they built a new family, welcoming 2 daughters and a son. However, Greg never gave up on his mission to find Sabrina, and Mariana fully supported him in his pursuit. Meanwhile, Sabrina was growing up in an unstable and isolated world. Without any real emotional support or sense of belonging, she had no friends and did not attend school. Dara, still on the run, never stayed in one place for too long, preventing her daughter from forming any connections outside their secretive life. In an effort to keep Sabrina from being recognized, Dara frequently dyed her daughter's hair, eyelashes, and eyebrows in shades of brown or red. The constant use of chemicals took a toll on Sabrina's scalp, leading to noticeable hair loss and even patches of baldness. According to reports, Dara remained hidden for years, successfully throwing Greg and the authorities off her trail. To ensure she wouldn't be recognized, she underwent multiple plastic surgeries, altering her appearance significantly. As time passed, Greg refused to give up, continuing to invest in the search. He hired a private investigator, Phil Klein, whose team followed hundreds of leads. Yet, despite their relentless efforts, every clue led to a dead end. 12 years later, when hope seemed all but lost, an unexpected breakthrough changed everything. An informant working with Klein's investigative team came forward with a crucial lead, one that suggested Sabrina was closer than they had ever imagined. Within a week, the team identified an address linked to Dara in the small town of Papalotla, southeast of Mexico City. By then, Sabrina was 17 years old, living with her mother in a modest two-bedroom apartment. Both were using false identities to remain undetected. Investigators kept the location under strict surveillance, carefully gathering evidence before taking action. Eventually, they secured the cooperation of the FBI, the Mexican Federal Police, and the U.S. Marshals Service. After 2 weeks of monitoring the residence, law enforcement was certain they had found them. On the night of September 30th, 2016, at approximately 11:32 p.m., authorities launched a surprise raid. Dara reacted with unexpected violence, resisting arrest in a chaotic confrontation that resulted in an officer being injured. The situation quickly escalated, but after several tense moments, officers finally secured Sabrina's rescue. Dara was immediately arrested and extradited to Texas, where she faced charges of aggravated kidnapping. Meanwhile, Sabrina was flown to Austin, where a medical team awaited her arrival. The years of captivity had taken a significant toll, physically, mentally, and emotionally. For Greg, it was a moment of overwhelming and conflicting emotions. He was overjoyed to have finally found his daughter, yet heartbroken to learn that she was not ready to see him. After so many years in isolation, Sabrina struggled to process her new reality. Though Greg had dreamed of embracing his daughter again, he understood that she needed time. At a press conference, he stated that his first question to Sabrina would not be, "How are you?" but rather, "Can I hug you?" While Greg hoped for her recovery, Sabrina began intensive psychological treatment to process the trauma she had endured since she was 4 years old. Reports indicated that she had not attended school for at least 2 years, leaving her far behind academically for her age. Social interactions were equally difficult, as years of isolation had made it hard for her to adjust to new surroundings. Though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: Sabrina was finally free, and Greg was determined to help her heal, no matter how long it took. Specialists diagnosed Sabrina with parental alienation syndrome, a condition that, according to experts, involved not only psychological manipulation but also deep emotional, intellectual, and spiritual harm. Over the years, her mother had convinced her that her father and his family did not love her and had never tried to find her. Later, Dara took the deception even further, telling Sabrina that Greg had taken his own life and that her grandparents had passed away as well. Sabrina's mental state was fragile, and psychologists in Texas determined that she would need extensive therapy to process the years of resentment and distrust toward her father. Greg faced the daunting task of proving to his daughter that he was not the cruel and abusive man her mother had described. His goal was to rebuild their bond, show her that he had never stopped searching for her, and remind her that she had always been loved. He hoped she would recall at least some of the happy moments they had shared before Dara took her away, and that, with time, they could create new memories together. To aid in her recovery, Celeste Chavez, Sabrina's childhood best friend from daycare, offered to support her. Having once been like sisters, Celeste wanted to remind Sabrina that she had always been cherished and that many people had never given up on her. She hoped to help her reconnect with the life she had lost and find a sense of belonging again. As Sabrina worked to adjust to her new life in the United States, Dara faced legal consequences for her actions. In March 2016, she appeared in court, where the judge reminded her that she was being prosecuted for kidnapping and interference with child custody, charges that carried a potential 10-year prison sentence. Her defense attorneys argued that she had taken her daughter because she believed Greg was harming her. However, the majority of witnesses spoke in favor of Greg, highlighting his unwavering commitment to finding Sabrina. By the time the trial took place, Sabrina had turned 18 and had chosen to go by the name Fair. Fortunately, she had managed to integrate into Greg's new family and was living with him, her stepmother, and her 3 half-siblings. Yet, despite her progress, the years spent under her mother's influence had left lasting scars. One of the specialists who treated Sabrina after her rescue testified in court, explaining that the first step in her recovery was helping her move out of a constant state of high alert, known in psychological terms as hypervigilance. Mariana also took the stand, sharing that Sabrina had made significant progress since moving in with them, and that her relationship with Greg was slowly strengthening. The court also heard from Sabrina's therapist, who confirmed that she suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder and often had nightmares about her mother's arrest in Mexico. However, despite these challenges, she was making meaningful strides in her recovery. Perhaps the most shocking testimony came from Dara's own sister, Dolores, who took the stand against her. She revealed disturbing details about Dara's behavior, stating that while in prison, she had sent a letter to their mother containing strands of hair she had pulled from her own head. Additionally, she had written to their mother, pretending to be their deceased father. This unsettling revelation further reinforced the court's view of Dara's psychological instability. Ultimately, Dara was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Shortly after her conviction, she filed an appeal, claiming that her defense attorney had been incompetent and had failed to represent her properly. However, the appeals court rejected her request, ruling that the original sentence would stand. As of January 31, 2025, when this investigation was concluded, no new public information had surfaced regarding Sabrina's life with Greg and his family. Similarly, there were no updates on Dara's current situation following her imprisonment.
Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. Georgine was once full of potential, poised to become a renowned movie star in the future. However, fate had something entirely different in store for her. One fateful day, just steps away from reaching her home, she vanished without a trace. In the summer of 2006, 14-year-old Georgine Kruger moved with her family to Berlin. Her parents had divorced a few years prior, and she now lived with her mother and her younger sister. Her older brother, Tommy, was 22 at the time and lived on his own. As the new girl in class, Georgine found it difficult to make friends. The other girls in school were not fond of the attention she received from the boys, who were drawn to her looks, though Georgine wasn't aware of the extent of her popularity. She took great care of her appearance, always wearing the latest trends and enjoying makeup. Georgine dreamed of becoming an actress and even considered modeling as a possible career. She often danced in front of the mirror, trying out different outfits, imagining herself on a grand stage. Her love for movies, especially Indian films, inspired her as she practiced the actors' moves and sang along to their songs while watching TV. On Friday, September 22, 2006, it seemed like her dreams were on the verge of coming true. Georgine had been offered a small role in the film Turkish for Beginners. She was told that she would receive a call on Monday, September 25th, with a final decision. The filming was set to take place during the upcoming fall break, and Georgine eagerly anticipated the news. Over the weekend, the wait felt endless for her, as she looked forward to confirming the role she had long hoped for. Monday, September 25, 2006, finally arrived, and despite being distracted, Georgine managed to get through her school day. She hurried home after class, determined not to miss the call from the agency. After leaving school, she headed straight to the bus stop, boarded bus number 27, and traveled just a few stops before getting off. From there, she had only some feet to walk before reaching her house. Around 2 p.m., she was seen getting off the bus. At home, her grandmother and younger sister had already prepared lunch and were waiting for Georgine to join them, but she never arrived. At 2 p.m., her grandmother tried calling her, but there was no answer. Concerned, she wondered if perhaps Georgine had missed the bus or stopped to talk to someone. Time continued to pass, and when another attempt to call went straight to voicemail, her grandmother's worry grew. Her grandmother decided to contact the school to check if anything unusual had happened. The school confirmed that Georgine had attended all her classes and left for home as usual. Her teacher did mention that Georgine seemed distracted that day, but her grandmother knew why. Georgine had been eagerly awaiting the call from the casting agency all weekend. As more time passed, her grandmother grew increasingly anxious. When Georgine's mother returned home, she was informed of the situation and immediately felt that something was wrong. It was entirely out of character for Georgine not to show up on time or contact her family. She was always punctual and responsible. Her phone, too, was never switched off. She quickly called the police to report her daughter's disappearance. Initially, the police considered several possibilities. Could Georgine have run away? Had she gotten into a disagreement with family or friends? Or maybe done something impulsive in the name of teenage love? However, it was crucial to remember that Georgine had been expecting an important call from the casting agency that day, and she wouldn't have missed it for the world. When Georgine was last seen, she was wearing light blue ripped jeans, ankle-high brown-heeled boots, and a white denim jacket. She also carried a pink backpack with long straps and had her mobile phone with her, which was later found to be switched off. By tracking the phone, detectives determined that the device had been active at 2:06 p.m., but by 2:08 p.m., it was turned off. It seemed unlikely that Georgine, so close to her home, would have suddenly changed her mind and gone elsewhere, especially when she was eagerly waiting for the casting agency's call. She was seen getting off bus number 27, confirming that she had been just minutes away from her house. A large search operation was launched in the neighborhood where the Kruger family lived, but Georgine was never seen again. All nearby attics and basements were thoroughly searched, with police using trained dogs to detect human remains. Investigators questioned local residents and Georgine's classmates and checked into several offenders who were either out on bail or had recently been released from prison. The Kruger family distributed flyers with Georgine's photo, and posters with her description were put up throughout the district. Her mother personally went door to door, seeking any clues about her daughter's whereabouts. Despite these extensive efforts, the investigation stalled with no substantial leads. Georgine seemed to have disappeared into thin air, just some feet away from her home. Weeks turned into months, and 3 years after her broad daylight disappearance, a second search operation was organized. This time, search dogs were used again, trained not only to detect human remains, but also to find living individuals. The dogs started their search from the bus stop, but instead of leading investigators to the Kruger home, they were directed toward the suburbs. Police searched the wooded area but found no trace of the girl's presence. It wasn't surprising, given the difficulty of tracking a scent after 3 years. Unfortunately, the renewed efforts didn't yield any new leads and the case remained stagnant. Years later, in 2016, another search was conducted, this time with a glimmer of hope for results. Residents of the neighborhood where the Kruger family lived were once again interviewed, and there was a small breakthrough. Neighbors recalled a 30-year-old unemployed man who had lived in the area. He spent hours on his porch, watching teenagers pass by, seemingly enjoying the view. He was frequently seen engaging young girls in conversation, often saying inappropriate things and asking provocative questions, like whether they had ever been with boys, hinting that he could help them with such matters. This man, identified as Ali, was known to try to downplay his age and present himself as younger in order to win the attention of teenage girls. Although the girls didn't fear him, they found him odd and kept their distance, which made the neighbors take notice of his behavior. Ali lived in the same apartment complex as the Kruger family. He had 3 children and lived with his wife. Unemployed and struggling with debt, he took on odd jobs and relied on social benefits to make ends meet. Despite his financial struggles, Ali had a fascination with luxury cars and fashion, even though he could only dream of owning them. When he wasn't watching the girls, Ali would spend his free time in a Turkish cafe located in the ground floor of the apartment building, meeting with acquaintances. Though he didn't have close friends, he regularly interacted with locals. The police paid close attention to the testimony about his suspicious behavior and checked his criminal history. In 2011, Ali had been involved in a violent incident where he lured a 17-year-old neighbor into his basement. The girl had been walking home with a friend when Ali, standing on the porch of his house, offered her a new mobile phone. Tempted by the offer, the girl hesitated, but eventually followed him to the basement where he claimed the phone was stored. However, there was no phone waiting for her. Instead, Ali confessed that he had been in love with her for a long time and was willing to leave his wife just to be with her. When the girl rejected his advances, Ali struck her on the back of the neck, causing her to collapse. He then sat on top of her, and despite her efforts to resist and scream, the girl was unable to fight him off. After the assault, Ali handed her a tissue to dry her tears and threatened her to keep quiet, warning her not to tell anyone, not her family, friends, or the police. The girl nodded in agreement, but once she escaped the basement, she headed straight to the police station and reported everything, pointing directly to Ali. She also gave a detailed description of the basement, mentioning specific details that confirmed her story. According to her, the basement looked more like a personal hideout where Ali spent his free time, rather than a cluttered storage space. In 2012, Ali was sentenced to 1.5 years of probation for assaulting the 17-year-old girl, along with charges of bodily harm. During his trial, Ali claimed that the girl had asked for a mobile phone and followed him voluntarily. He denied any wrongdoing, asserting that he wouldn't jeopardize his family's well-being, and accused the girl of fabricating the story. However, the girl's account matched with the evidence and Ali was found guilty. This case bore eerie similarities to Georgine's disappearance. Both girls had been returning home after school and vanished in the same area where Ali had previously attacked another teenage girl. According to the phone data, Georgine disappeared just down the street from where Ali lived. Georgine would have had to pass by Ali's door in any case. Could Ali have intercepted her somehow? The issue was that the search dog showed no interest in the basement of Ali's house, and detectives lacked specific evidence. No witness statements, no DNA, nothing concrete to tie him to the crime. The only notable detail was that on the day of Georgine's disappearance, both her phone and Ali's were detected in the same area. While this could suggest they were together, it might simply indicate that they lived on the same street. Interrogating Ali seemed futile without substantial proof, as he would likely deny any involvement in Georgine's disappearance. As a result, the authorities decided to use a rather unconventional strategy. They began monitoring Ali's phone calls. Over weeks of surveillance, they discovered that Ali had financial troubles. He was gambling and owed a significant amount. The police decided to exploit this weakness. Instead of engaging in a long-term, costly operation, they chose to infiltrate Ali's circle. An undercover officer was assigned to the case. His mission was to gain Ali's trust and gather any information related to Georgine Kruger's disappearance. Posing as a successful businessman looking to open a car wash in Berlin, the officer introduced himself at the Turkish cafe Ali frequented. The cafe, conveniently located in the same building where Ali lived, became the perfect spot for the officer to establish contact with the suspect. The operation was expected to take time, as any sudden move could arouse Ali's suspicions. The officer gradually became familiar with the cafe regulars, sharing his story about wanting to start a car wash business in the area. He mentioned he was looking for a manager with a good salary, which piqued Ali's interest, especially given his financial struggles. Soon the officer and Ali became inseparable. They even took a business trip to Frankfurt together, deepening their bond. Ali began to believe that his life was about to change, envisioning himself as the manager of the new car wash. Ali tried to present himself as a respectable man, eager not to lose out on the lucrative job opportunity. Ali thought that if everything went according to plan, his financial troubles would be over, and he could finally afford the lifestyle and luxury cars he had always dreamed of. Despite the developing friendship, the case of Georgine made no progress. To move things forward, the authorities introduced another undercover agent, codenamed Susie, into the operation. According to the cover story, Susie was the officer's girlfriend. Her role was to grow close to Ali's wife in hopes of gathering information. Over time, they became close friends, and the two couples often spent time together, hosting parties and even going on vacations. However, even with this deepening connection, the case remained cold, with no evidence linking Ali to Georgine's disappearance. Ali's sister began to grow suspicious of the undercover agents. She felt that they had not entered her brother's life by chance and was skeptical of their motives. She even noticed that they didn't seem like a genuine couple. If Ali had paid attention to his sister's concerns, the situation might have played out differently. However, he was too focused on his potential future as a business manager to listen to anyone. Realizing that Ali was determined to maintain his image in front of his supposed employer, the investigators brought another undercover agent into the operation, the officer's cousin, who had a criminal past. According to the cover story, the cousin was involved in shady activities and was willing to commit crimes. The authorities hoped that by associating with someone willing to break the law, Ali might open up and reveal critical information. With no physical evidence to rely on, they could only hope for a confession. The cousin and Ali quickly bonded, beginning their friendship with a visit to a brothel. Despite initially trying to maintain an image of loyalty to his wife, Ali soon abandoned his principles. The cousin paid for the encounter out of his own pocket, explaining that he had earned the money illegally, which allowed him to spend it freely. This approach revealed two sides of Ali, one as a family man who wanted to work hard for his future, and another as a carefree partier for whom his wife and children were not an obstacle to indulgence. To solidify the operation's credibility, the investigators went as far as renting land for the fictional car wash and signing a fake contract with Ali. All hopes were now pinned on the cousin. If he couldn't extract a confession from Ali, the case of Georgine might remain unsolved. However, in 2018, something unexpected happened. An unknown man called the police, claiming that while he wasn't the perpetrator, he knew where Georgine Kruger's body was. The caller provided coordinates for where the remains could be found before hanging up. Efforts to trace the call were unsuccessful, but a team of specialists was dispatched to the location. The coordinates led to a nearby forest, where an extensive search was conducted, but no trace of the girl was found. It remains unclear whether the call was a cruel joke or an attempt to mislead the investigation further. Unfortunately, the caller was never located, leaving investigators at a dead end once again. Nevertheless, new flyers were created with a special QR code. When scanned, the code allowed people to hear the anonymous caller's voice, in the hope that someone might recognize it and provide a clue. Meanwhile, the detectives tried to set a trap for Ali. They rented his favorite model of Porsche, equipped it with a listening device, and placed a flyer with Georgine's picture and QR code in the back seat. Through the undercover agents, they arranged for Ali and his wife to take a ride in the car, hoping it would spark a conversation about the missing girl. Initially, Ali and his wife didn't notice the flyer, but eventually it caught their attention. Ali became noticeably nervous. He began speculating about who the caller might have been and what information they could have had. Later, Ali took the flyer to the Turkish cafe, showing it to his friends in an attempt to gather more information. He claimed he wanted to help the police. This raised suspicions among the investigators, as they wondered why someone with no connection to the case would suddenly feel the need to collect information after so many years. Ali's actions only reinforced the authorities' belief that they were on the right track. The next phase of the operation was to use the cousin's relationship with Ali to their advantage. The cousin confided in Ali about his troubled relationship with his girlfriend, explaining that he had wanted to break up with her for some time but couldn't because she was blackmailing him. He revealed that he had once killed someone and had confessed this secret to his girlfriend. Now, she was threatening to go to the police if he left her. He sought Ali's advice on how to deal with the situation. Ali sympathized but did not reveal anything about Georgine's disappearance. To accelerate the process, the cousin offered Ali 150,000 euros to eliminate his girlfriend by any means necessary, even if it meant breaking the law. The detectives knew that Ali was in dire financial straits and had yet to start his job as a car wash manager. The 150,000 euros could solve all his problems. Ali, eager to seize the opportunity, offered to take care of the blackmailer himself. He began planning various ways to carry out the job, discussing details such as the girl's weight, whether a car would be needed, and the best location for the attack. As Ali considered his options, the trap was closing in. While discussing the logistics of the crime, Ali confessed to the cousin that he had researched online how to dispose of a body. The undercover agent let Ali talk freely, avoiding any accusations of entrapment. During these conversations, Ali eventually opened up about Georgine's disappearance. He described her as an attractive young girl who passed by his door every day on her way home from school. On September 25, 2006, he was waiting at his usual spot when Georgine stepped off the bus. That day, she was in a good mood, smiling and radiant. Ali approached her, asking for help carrying some bags to his basement, offering to pay her for the favor. Knowing her neighbor and not suspecting any danger, Georgine agreed. When Georgine entered, Ali struck her on the head. She screamed in pain, so to silence her, he hit her again, harder this time. Georgine lost consciousness and collapsed. Ali then described what happened next, lamenting his actions but knowing that if he let her go, he would face prison. So he strangled her until she stopped breathing. Ali's detailed account of the assault was too vivid to be fabricated, and his story matched known facts. After killing Georgine, Ali hid her body in the basement for 3 days before wrapping her in an old rug and disposing of her in the trash. Investigators later confirmed that all trash was incinerated, meaning Georgine's remains were completely destroyed. Ali's confession was enough to arrest him, and in December 2018, 12 years after Georgine's disappearance, he was taken into custody while at home with his daughter. All of Ali's properties were searched, but no evidence was found linking him to the missing girl. During questioning, Ali remained silent. He did not speak when charged and continued to say nothing in court. He remained in custody for a year and a half while he and his family were confident he would be acquitted, as there was no physical evidence against him, no DNA, no body, and no witnesses, just his confession. However, the prosecution compared Ali's previous conviction with his statements and found significant similarities. It appeared to be the work of the same criminal. Ultimately, it was Ali's detailed account of the events on the day Georgine disappeared that convinced the jury and judge of his guilt in the death of 14-year-old Georgine Kruger, a girl who might have achieved fame in the film industry. The news of her neighbor's arrest and subsequent conviction devastated her. On March 17, 2020, Ali was sentenced to life imprisonment. He later claimed he was a victim, stating that he had agreed to act as a hitman for the cousin's girlfriend to protect her and take her out of danger. He intended to go to the police and expose the cousin's plan. Despite his claims of innocence, his confession spoke for itself. Surprisingly, Ali's family also believes he was wrongfully convicted, arguing that the police spent too much time and money trying to incriminate him. They believe the crime was pinned on him to justify the expenses. Only Ali knows the full truth, and perhaps one day his conscience will compel him to fully admit his guilt. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.
For a well-known middle-aged couple from Huntsville, Alabama, the Memorial Day weekend of 1992 was meant to rekindle their romance after the demands of daily life had kept them apart for far too long. They had no idea that tragedy was just around the corner. At first glance, the case seemed straightforward, a robbery gone horribly wrong. However, an unexpected tip turned the investigation toward two unlikely suspects. But was the final verdict as clear-cut as it seemed, or was justice left undone? Regardless of how Dr. Wilson was killed, the real question remained: who didn't commit the crime? Jack Wilson was born on May 5, 1937, in Chicago, Illinois. Little is known about his early life before he moved to Huntsville, Alabama. He had been married and divorced, with 3 children from his first wife. After the end of that marriage, Jack sought a fresh start and relocated to Huntsville. While establishing his ophthalmology practice, Dr. Wilson also worked as a consultant and performed eye surgeries at a local hospital. Friends, employees, and patients often described him as a kind man with a sharp sense of humor. Jack quickly became a beloved figure in the community, known not only as a gentleman but also as a compassionate doctor. In many cases, he treated patients free of charge if they couldn't afford his medical fees. Love returned to Jack's life when he met his second wife, Betty Woods. She worked as a nurse at the same hospital where Jack was employed. The two grew close while attending to a patient during the same shift. Their whirlwind romance led to Jack proposing, and Betty happily accepted. They married in 1978 and, despite their busy schedules, managed to make their marriage work. Those who knew them saw a deeply devoted couple. Jack often spoiled Betty with expensive gifts and trips, while Betty showered him with love and attention. Together, they lived in a grand brick mansion in an upscale neighborhood. For the next 14 years, they shared a mostly peaceful relationship. However, there were occasional arguments, often over Betty's drinking problems and Jack's demanding work schedule. Adding to their personal troubles was Jack's advanced Crohn's disease, which severely impacted his digestive system and required him to use a colostomy bag, causing strain on their intimate life. But Jack was determined to make things work. With Memorial Day weekend in 1992 approaching, he planned a romantic getaway to Santa Fe, New Mexico, just for the two of them. Sadly, his plans never materialized. On Friday afternoon, May 22, 1992, Jack left his office at 4 p.m. and returned home to prepare for their trip. The following morning, neighbors saw him outside, placing a political campaign sign in his yard with a metal baseball bat around 4:30 p.m. That was the last time anyone saw Jack alive. At 9:30 p.m. on that same Friday, Betty returned to the house she shared with Jack after attending an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. She called out for him as she entered, but there was no answer. Betty headed upstairs to start packing for their trip the next day, only to find Jack lying unconscious and covered in blood in the hallway outside their bedroom door. Terrified, she fled the house, fearing the intruder might still be inside. She ran to a neighbor's house and asked them to call 911. Officers arrived within minutes, but it quickly became apparent this was no ordinary break-in. It was a murder. Near Jack's body, they found what appeared to be the weapon, a metal baseball bat. Police brought in sniffer dogs to search for evidence that might have been missed. They discovered a cut phone line in the bedroom and a ski mask lying on the bed. An open gun case with ammunition, but no firearm was found, along with Jack's wallet, which was empty of cash, but his credit cards remained. A sweep of the house revealed that the intruder had not ransacked other rooms. The mess was largely confined to the bedroom, raising doubts that this was a simple robbery gone wrong. Stranger still, no fingerprints were found on the murder weapon or anywhere else in the house. Betty, understandably, was too shaken to be interviewed immediately. Instead, investigators turned to the neighbors, asking if anyone had noticed anything unusual that day. However, no one recalled seeing or hearing anything out of the ordinary. Neighbors were also adamant that Jack had no known enemies. He was well loved in the community for his generous nature. Eventually, Betty calmed down enough to speak with investigators. She shared details about her day, mentioning that she had met Jack for lunch before they went their separate ways. Jack returned to his office while she ran some last-minute errands. Later, she attended her meeting and came home to find him unconscious. Her account was backed up by receipts from her shopping and witnesses from the meeting. The state medical examiner performed the autopsy and found multiple lacerations to Jack's head, along with a fractured skull. His hyoid bone was broken, indicating strangulation, and he had fractures to his right shoulder and neck, along with stab wounds in his abdomen. His arms were also broken, suggesting he had tried to defend himself. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head and upper body. Although the metal bat was believed to be the murder weapon, it was not immediately handed over for forensic analysis. However, blood found on the bat was later confirmed to match Jack Wilson's blood type. Despite these findings, the case hit a dead end until a woman called the police, claiming she overheard a man talking about being hired to kill a doctor from Huntsville. The man she named was James White. Though the tip was met with skepticism, it was the first real lead in the case, prompting the police to investigate further. Investigators traveled to Vincent, Alabama, where 42-year-old James White lived in a mobile home on the outskirts of town. Since his divorce, James had been working part-time as a maintenance man at Vincent Elementary School. A background check revealed a troubled past. James had been dishonorably discharged while serving in Vietnam and had turned to alcohol and drugs to cope with the trauma. He had been in and out of prison and mental institutions and had been diagnosed with delusional behavior. James had also been involved in a prison escape and a suspected kidnapping. When questioned about his involvement in the case, James, like many criminals, initially gave investigators the runaround. He told half-truths, made contradictory statements, and denied everything at the start of the interview process. However, after 10 hours of interrogation, as dawn broke on a new day, James finally cracked and admitted to being at the Wilsons' home on the night of the murder. He was promptly arrested and charged with the murder of Jack Wilson. A search warrant was issued for James's property. In his mobile home, police found a pair of shoes with bloodstains, and in an abandoned house nearby, they discovered a weapon. In his truck, they found a book of poetry. While in custody, James began sharing several stories, the most significant involving a woman named Peggy, a first-grade teacher at Vincent Elementary School. James claimed he had done some carpentry work for Peggy, who supposedly developed feelings for him and started confiding in him about her unhappiness in her marriage. According to James, Peggy had once floated the idea of killing her husband but later backed out. However, she then asked James if he could help her sister hire someone to kill her sister's husband instead. James claimed he told Peggy he knew someone who could do the job for $20,000, but Peggy responded that it was too much since her sister wasn't in a good financial situation. They eventually settled on $5,000, half to be paid up front and the rest after the job was done. Though James's stories weren't entirely reliable, investigators followed up on the name he provided and soon uncovered a surprising connection between the woman named Peggy and the victim, Dr. Jack Wilson. The name sounded familiar to the investigators, but they couldn't immediately place it. As they reviewed their notes on the Wilson case, they made a shocking discovery. Peggy was the twin sister of Jack's wife, Betty Wilson. This revelation gave investigators more reason to dig deeper into James's story. The evidence collected during the search of James's property further supported this connection. The blood on James's shoes matched Jack Wilson's blood type. The weapon found was registered in Betty Wilson's name, and the book found in James's truck had been borrowed from Betty. With these findings, the investigators began to focus on the sisters, Betty and Peggy. Betty and Peggy were born on July 14, 1945. As fraternal twins, they had two older sisters and a challenging childhood, with their father often venting his frustrations on the family, both emotionally and physically. As they grew older and became teenagers, their differences in personality became more apparent. Peggy was a social butterfly with strong values and was even crowned homecoming queen. Betty, on the other hand, was rebellious, challenging authority and disregarding her parents' rules. She preferred the company of boys and wild parties. Both sisters married right after high school, had children, and eventually divorced. Peggy moved to Vincent, where she met and married a church deacon, dedicating her life to family and the church. In contrast, Betty moved to Huntsville, where she continued her party lifestyle. She enrolled in the nursing program at the University of Alabama, specializing in kidney dialysis. In 1976, she met Dr. Jack Wilson while working as a nurse, and they eventually married. Those close to the couple noticed that Betty thrived on the lifestyle Jack's wealth provided, enjoying the financial benefits that came with it. However, her relationship with her husband was more complicated. Cracks began to show as Jack became overwhelmed with work, spending long hours at the office and away from his new wife. Betty grew bored with his absence and turned to alcohol as a coping mechanism for her loneliness. She often partied late into the night, coming home intoxicated and ready to argue with Jack. Additionally, Jack's illness had become a strain on their relationship. Due to his colostomy, Jack could no longer maintain an intimate relationship with Betty, which led to a breakdown in their physical connection. According to a former housemate, Shirley Green, there was an incident where Jack's colostomy bag came loose during intercourse, causing a mess in the room. This led Betty to lose her temper with Jack. Afterward, she insisted they sleep in separate bedrooms and lead separate lives. Green also testified that Betty openly had affairs, often bringing lovers into the house while Jack was at work. Reports suggested that Betty eventually suffered from a pancreas-related illness and attempted to improve her behavior by joining Alcoholics Anonymous. However, she continued her affairs due to Jack's frequent absences, a fact she admitted to investigators during interviews. Despite their struggles, both Jack and Betty, having endured failed marriages before, were determined not to go through another divorce. Instead, they agreed to give their marriage another shot. It became increasingly clear to investigators that their attempts at reconciliation were merely a facade. The circumstantial evidence against Betty was overwhelming, leading to the arrest of Betty Wilson and Peggy on May 27, 1992, both charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Although investigators and prosecutors had their suspects in custody, they still needed to build a solid case to convict Betty and Peggy. Reviewing all the information gathered during the investigation, they theorized that Betty was motivated by greed. Interviews with those connected to the case suggested that Betty loved the lifestyle Jack's wealth provided but didn't love Jack himself. He had become a burden. Betty remained in custody awaiting trial, while Peggy, with the help of friends, was able to post the $150,000 bail and awaited her court date at her home in Vincent, Alabama. Much of the prosecution's case hinged on the testimony of James White. The district attorney agreed to offer James a plea deal in exchange for his honest testimony at the sisters' trial. The deal allowed James to plead guilty to simple murder instead of capital murder, but with a life sentence without the possibility of parole. James's appointed defense attorney negotiated a plea agreement for James White, reducing the charge to one with the possibility of parole after 7 years or less. James accepted the deal, avoiding the death penalty. After months of interrogation, James finally agreed to testify against Peggy and Betty, providing a more detailed and consistent account of the events. His confession was recorded by the prosecution, where he explained how Peggy came to trust him over time and introduced him to her sister, Betty. His confession also linked the poetry book to the case, detailing how Betty handed him the book containing the agreed-upon money. Betty Wilson's trial began on March 2, 1993. During the trial, James White's repeated confessions and the evidence found at his property were presented in court. Although no forensic evidence was found in Betty's car to corroborate James's claims, the trial proceeded based on the totality of the investigative findings. The prosecution focused heavily on Betty's character, portraying her as a manipulative woman driven by greed and dissatisfaction. Witnesses testified about Betty's numerous affairs and her volatile relationship with Jack, highlighting that her motivation for the murder was to inherit Jack's wealth. Betty's former housemate testified that Betty often ridiculed Jack and openly had affairs in their home. Marianne Lowe, who attended AA meetings with Betty, testified that she ended her friendship with her after discovering that Betty had used her as an alibi for her affairs. Harold Fitzpatrick, a man with whom Betty had an affair after meeting at an AA meeting, also took the stand. He testified about their relationship, which continued in Betty's home, even up until May 1992, just before the murder. The defense argued that bringing Fitzpatrick to the stand was a strategy to tarnish Betty's reputation before the jury. They insinuated racial undertones, as Fitzpatrick was African American, which the defense suggested was being used to make Betty's actions appear more immoral. The prosecution objected, and Fitzpatrick was excused after his testimony. Next, the prosecution presented testimony from the security guards at the park where Betty had allegedly met James. A park guard confirmed that James White had arrived at the entrance and requested permission to retrieve a book from Betty Wilson. Another guard testified that he accompanied Betty to her car where she retrieved the book and asked him to deliver it to James at the gate. Numerous witnesses reported seeing James in the neighborhood in the days leading up to the murder. Additionally, records showed that James had checked into a hotel on May 21, 1992, the day before Jack's murder. Phone records demonstrated frequent contact between James and Betty in the weeks before the murder. The prosecution argued that these interactions, combined with the evidence found in James's truck, pointed to a clear conspiracy between Betty and James. Betty's defense team argued that her interactions with James were purely innocent and that she had been trying to help him with his addiction to alcohol and drugs. They claimed the money given to James was meant to assist him in attending an AA meeting at the park and to reserve a room, not to pay for Jack's murder. After hearing all the evidence and testimonies, the jury deliberated for 2 days before returning with a verdict. They found Betty Wilson guilty of capital murder. The jury concluded that Betty had hired James White to kill her husband, Jack Wilson, in exchange for financial gain from his estate. Betty was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 6 months later, Peggy went on trial. A new jury was selected, and Peggy had the advantage of having a new forensic analyst testify on her behalf. James returned to the stand during Peggy's trial, but his confession was now vague and inconsistent, with key details changed. such as the time Betty allegedly picked him up after the murder. The prosecution presented the same evidence and witnesses in Peggy's trial as they had in Betty's. The major difference in Peggy's case, however, was her character. Unlike her sister, no one had anything negative to say about the beloved first-grade teacher. Peggy was portrayed as a devoted wife and mother and a dedicated member of the church, always willing to help those in need. The forensic analyst's testimony was crucial in undermining James's confession and the state's theory of the murder. He argued that James's claim of acting alone was false, suggesting that it would have taken two people to carry out the attack and move Jack's body. He also pointed out that Jack had likely been attacked elsewhere and moved to the hallway, as there were no blood splatters in the original crime scene. He also highlighted that James had not identified the baseball bat as the murder weapon. According to him, fibers from Jack's hair should have been found on the bat if it had been used to strike him, but none were present. Instead, he theorized that a fireplace poker was likely used, given the type of puncture wound found on Jack's shoulder, and that the weapon had been removed from the crime scene. Peggy's defense team argued that she had no motive to conspire to kill her brother-in-law and lacked any malicious tendencies, a fact supported by numerous testimonies praising her character and her role in the church and community. After just 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found Peggy not guilty of all charges. Peggy was acquitted, and the case against her was closed. Life in Huntsville began to return to normal after the sensational murder-for-hire case. But the story didn't end there. In 1994, 1 year after the trials, James White recanted his confession. He claimed that he had been pressured by investigators to testify against Betty Wilson and Peggy in exchange for a lesser charge. In his new statement, White expressed a desire to right the wrong he had done to Betty. He also mentioned that he suffered from blackouts and couldn't remember the events leading up to or during Jack Wilson's murder. Prosecutors warned James that retracting his confession could result in him facing the death penalty. During a second appeal for Betty Wilson, James White invoked his Fifth Amendment right, refusing to answer questions about his prior statements. Over the years, James's story continued to change. He was denied parole in both 2004 and 2020 and remains incarcerated. After her acquittal, Peggy returned to her teaching job and gave numerous interviews over the years, where she continued to assert Betty's innocence. Betty Wilson has exhausted all her appeals, with the court remaining firm in its conviction that she was responsible for conspiring to hire a hitman to kill her husband, Jack Wilson. Despite James White's ever-changing story, the court believes his initial confession during Betty's trial was credible and provided key evidence leading to her conviction. In 2006, while incarcerated, Betty remarried former Marine Robert Campbell, who had become fascinated by her case after watching an episode of 48 Hours about it. However, Alabama law does not permit conjugal visits.
Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. At 6 a.m. on Monday, April 24, 2017, two local residents were driving near a soccer complex. As they passed by, they noticed something unusual lying in the parking lot. Initially, the woman and her daughter couldn't quite make out what it was from the car. Curiosity got the best of them, and they pulled over to investigate. What they found was shocking. It was the lifeless body of a person. After overcoming their initial shock, They quickly dialed 911. By 7 a.m., the police had arrived at the scene. They discovered the body of a young woman, lying lifeless in the gravel of the parking lot. The atmosphere was heavy, and it appeared that she had been there for some time with a pool of blood surrounding her. Prior to this tragic discovery, security cameras had captured the last moments of 20-year-old Haley Rathgaber. She had been seen getting into a car with a man. However, that same man was later seen returning alone that night. With no signs of struggle, investigators speculated that Haley may not have resisted her attacker. Yet, crucial questions remained. Was the man seen on the security footage responsible for her death? Her body was found lying in a position akin to making a snow angel, with the fatal gunshot wound being the only visible injury. Interestingly, the only other clue found at the scene was a blood-stained blue towel near her body. Despite combing the area thoroughly, no weapon or shell casings were discovered. The scene was a mess, littered with debris and trash, making the search for useful evidence difficult. Even more puzzling was the absence of any personal belongings, no wallet, phone, or keys. It was as though all traces of her identity had been erased. Thankfully, detectives were able to find one vital clue, a tattoo of a cross on her back adorned with a Bible verse. Recognizing this as a possible means of identification, they turned to the media for help. The rarity of violent crime in the area meant that news of the incident spread rapidly, leaving the community both shocked and fearful. In times like this, media coverage can be instrumental. Simply reporting that a body has been found might prompt families to check in on loved ones sooner than they otherwise would. One such concerned resident was Heather Collins, who lived in Evansville, Indiana, just 15 miles from where the body had been discovered. The authorities were treating the death as suspicious, sparking a full investigation. With the victim believed to be between 19 and 20 years old, Heather's concerns for her daughters grew. Fortunately, her younger daughters were found safe and sound, but her eldest daughter, Haley, was nowhere to be found. Haley's failure to answer calls and texts was entirely out of character, heightening the family's worry. Haley was known for being prompt in her responses, and the silence was alarming. Frantic, Heather and her other daughters began reaching out to Haley's friends, hoping to get any clue about her whereabouts. Their anxiety skyrocketed when they learned that Haley had missed an important exam at her university. As a dedicated nursing student in her second year, skipping class was something she would never do. Desperate for answers, Heather contacted a close friend and co-worker of Haley's, asking if she had any news. She also requested her to check on her on Haley's apartment. When she arrived, she noticed Haley's car parked outside, but the apartment door was unlocked. Despite this, there was no sign of Haley inside. Growing more anxious by the minute, Heather reached out to a detective friend from the police department, explaining the situation and seeking help. Shortly after, she was asked to provide photos of Haley's tattoos. Tragically, the worst fears came true. Detectives confirmed that the body found near the soccer complex was indeed Haley, using her tattoos to identify her. Haley Rathgaber was born on December 3, 1996, and lived an extraordinary life during her 20 years. Known for her maturity and natural caregiving instincts, she took on a maternal role among her friends. One friend recalled how she stood out not only because of her height, but also for her caring nature. It was no surprise when she chose a career in nursing at the University of Southern Indiana, aligning with her desire to help others. Haley was also incredibly self-sufficient. In high school, she worked at Donut Bank in Newburgh, and during college she took a job at Texas Roadhouse, a local restaurant, to support herself financially. But work was more than just an income source. It was where she built a close-knit group of friends, many of whom she had known since high school. This tight group, known as the Radies, spent a lot of time together celebrating birthdays and creating cherished memories. However, it was possible that someone from Haley's trusted circle might have harmed her. For her family, there was one person in particular who raised concerns. Haley's mother revealed to detectives that her daughter had recently been in a tense situation with one of her friends, a revelation that surprised investigators. Haley was the godmother to 10-month-old Jackson, the son of her longtime friend Jordan Hughes. Haley adored being a godmother, relishing the opportunity to spend time with a baby without having to raise one herself. With Jackson's father out of the picture and Jordan working hard to support her family, the baby was often cared for by Jordan's boyfriend. He took on the role of father figure and was also a friend of Haley's and other members of their group. However, just days before Haley's murder, on April 10, 2017, a tragic accident occurred. While Jordan's boyfriend had Jackson in a car seat, he reportedly tripped over a diaper bag, causing the baby to fall down the stairs at their apartment. Jackson was rushed to the hospital and was in critical condition. Upon hearing the news, Haley and her friends hurried to the hospital to support Jordan. They brought her food and comforted her during the difficult time. Later, they returned to Haley's home to grab clean clothes, but something unusual caught their attention. As soon as they entered, they noticed the diaper bag sitting beside the couch, contradicting Jordan's boyfriend's claim that it had caused him to trip and fall down the stairs. This discovery led the group to suspect that the man might have been hiding something. While many still embraced him, they couldn't shake their growing distrust, particularly because of his bad reputation in town and previous run-ins with the law. The tragic incident with Jackson only intensified their suspicions. Sadly, Jackson did not survive the fall, passing away after 2 days in intensive care. During police questioning, Jordan's boyfriend's inconsistent version of events raised further doubts, especially since Jackson's injuries didn't align with the type of fall that he had described. Haley was torn about what to do. She debated whether to share her suspicions with the police. She had even mentioned to friends that if the police wanted to talk to her, she would be willing. In fact, the police had spoken to her just days before her murder. If she had revealed or was about to reveal something that could implicate Jordan's boyfriend, it would have provided a strong motive for him to harm her. There were additional circumstances that heightened suspicion surrounding him. When detectives interviewed Haley's co-workers at the restaurant, they learned that on Sunday, April 23, 2017, after finishing her shift, Haley had been invited out for drinks with friends but declined. Instead, she planned to go to the library with a friend. However, those plans changed when she decided to visit Jordan to pick up her wallet. At the time, Jordan was at his boyfriend's brother's house. This location became the last known place where Haley was before her body was found. These events triggered alarm bells for both Haley's mother and the detectives. With such serious charges looming over Jordan's boyfriend, whose name was Thaddeus Rice, he had both the motive and the opportunity to commit the crime. Adding to the suspicion, the day after Haley's tragic death, her mother received a Snapchat video showing Rice brandishing a firearm. The disturbing footage intensified concerns about his potential involvement. Social media also buzzed with rumors implicating Rice in Haley's murder. With all these incriminating pieces falling into place, investigators were closing in on Thaddeus Rice and knew it was time to question him. However, when interrogated, Rice invoked his right to remain silent and requested legal representation, deepening suspicions about his involvement. His refusal to cooperate only made the detectives more wary. Jordan provided an alibi for Rice, stating that both of them had spent the night at Rice's brother's house, but the detectives weren't convinced they were any closer to making an arrest. With little physical evidence to go on, Haley's family was left grieving as they began the painful process of preparing for her funeral. Heather couldn't shake the anxiety that the person who killed her daughter might even show up at the candlelight vigil being held in her honor. However, the vigil also gave investigators a chance to observe everyone in attendance, hoping to catch any suspicious behavior. Despite these efforts, the case seemed to be stalling. Then, a call came in from one of Haley's closest friends, another member of the Radies. He recounted his activities from the night of April 23rd, explaining that after work, he spent time with another coworker. Later, he received a text from Haley asking him to come by her apartment. After a brief visit, Haley asked him to drop her off at Newburgh Docks, a local landmark just a few miles from the soccer field where her body was later found. Concerned but not wanting to pry, he obliged and left without questioning her further. He tried to reach her by text that night but received no response. This information gave detectives a clearer timeline of Haley's movements the night of her murder. They turned their focus to another friend, Jack, who lived near the Newburgh Docks. Jack added that Haley had planned to meet someone that evening. Despite searching Jack's home, investigators found no evidence linking him to the crime. Surveillance footage from a nearby Walmart also corroborated both men's alibi, leaving detectives without sufficient evidence to move forward. As the investigation grew more complex, the police discovered another potential lead. A Texas Roadhouse employee had reportedly dropped off blood-stained clothing at a local dry cleaner. Investigators immediately began looking into who this person was and whether they could be connected to the case. The clothing in question belonged to James Wetson, a cook at the restaurant. When detectives questioned James, who usually kept to himself at work, he provided a straightforward explanation for the blood, stating that he had cut himself earlier that week. Detectives then took DNA swabs from James and sent them, along with the clothing, to the lab. Unfortunately for the detectives, the results brought no new leads. The clothing only contained James's DNA, confirming his story and clearing him as a suspect. With the third suspect eliminated, investigators continued to focus on the remaining two suspects, even enlisting help from the FBI. Then, an unexpected twist changed everything. Nearly a week after Haley's murder on April 29, 2017, the FBI made a significant breakthrough. While Haley's cell phone remained missing, they had managed to retrieve her call records. Investigators were eager to know about her last phone activity, so they began tracking the phone's location to create a rough timeline. Their next step was to figure out who Haley had been communicating with. The call logs revealed a startling discovery. Haley had been in contact with Isaiah Hagen. This revelation prompted detectives to pull Isaiah's phone records as well, and what they uncovered was shocking. Isaiah's movements mirrored Haley's. According to the phone activity, Isaiah met with Haley at her apartment around 10:30 p.m. on April 23, 2017. Together, they traveled east of Evansville, arriving at the soccer field around 11 p.m. This directly contradicted Isaiah's previous statement to the police, where he claimed to have dropped Haley off at a different location. Haley's phone went offline at the soccer complex around 11:25 p.m., Around the same time, Isaiah's phone also left the area. Interestingly, Haley's phone briefly reappeared near southwest Evansville at around 3 a.m., but shut off again after 20 minutes, never to be turned on again. With conflicting stories, detectives turned to surveillance footage from Haley's apartment. The footage showed Haley getting into a car with Isaiah, but when he returned in the early morning to check Haley's car, he was alone. But detectives had more than just location data and surveillance footage to aid their investigation. Typically, text messages aren't fully available. Only a record of them being sent remains. However, in this case, they were able to retrieve the actual contents of the messages, and Isaiah's texts were damning. It turned out that Isaiah had a history of bouncing checks, with his father having to bail him out financially. On the night of Haley's murder, Isaiah had been texting his father about the money he owed while he was at the soccer field. Sadly, Isaiah's father wasn't aware of the full extent of his son's sinister plan to get the money back. Detectives discovered that Isaiah had resorted to various means to make ends meet. He had been stealing from his roommates and pawning their belongings at local shops. Eventually, his roommate kicked him out. Furthermore, Isaiah owed Haley $600, money she had lent him to cover his rent shortly before her murder. Additionally, he had forged 2 checks from her checkbook, each for $300, one of which bounced due to insufficient funds. Haley had confided in her friends about the stolen checks, even showing them an image of the check made out to Isaiah for $300 worth of groceries. Despite being understandably upset, Haley's compassionate nature led her to forgive him, and their friendship endured. Whether money was the motive that turned Isaiah from a petty thief into a cold-blooded killer on the night of April 23, 2017, remained uncertain. Ironically, the individual who had initially appeared as a concerned friend had now become the prime suspect. To gather more evidence, detectives obtained a warrant to search Isaiah's residence. He lived with his parents, who were speechless when detectives informed them that their son was a suspect in the murder of Haley. According to his parents, Isaiah had always been well-behaved, shy, kind, happy, easygoing, and eager to please. Everyone loved him. They insisted that Isaiah had been devastated by Haley's death, describing how he collapsed on the floor, consumed by grief. They also claimed they were unaware of Isaiah's financial struggles and found it unimaginable that he could resort to murder for money. However, the evidence told a different story. During the search, detectives found that Isaiah's father owned several firearms. The Hagans confirmed that a pistol was missing from their home, but couldn't explain how it had disappeared. The search continued, and detectives uncovered even more incriminating evidence: a towel that closely resembled the one found at the scene where Haley's body was discovered. The evidence seemed convincing enough for authorities to bring Isaiah in for a formal interrogation. The police had him sit down and informed him that they needed to talk, signaling that the investigation had taken a serious turn. Initially, Isaiah stuck to the same story he had told earlier. He had picked Haley up from her apartment and dropped her off near the dam where she was supposed to meet someone. He claimed he wasn't sure if this had happened on Friday or Saturday, recounting how Haley had assured him she was fine when he left. That's when detectives confronted Isaiah with the cell phone data evidence. They showed him a video illustrating the movements of both his and Haley's phones on a map of the area around the soccer complex, highlighting the timeline of events. Faced with this undeniable evidence, Isaiah's story began to change. He admitted to taking Haley to the soccer field but insisted that he left her there with all her belongings intact. Yet, even this version didn't align with the location data. Isaiah claimed that the only explanation he could think of was that Haley's phone had somehow stayed in his car. Ultimately, he admitted to having Haley's phone with him all night. He said he threw it out of his car window the following morning because he feared getting into trouble if anyone found it on him. He explained that this was why he had kept quiet earlier, apologizing and stating that he omitted the information out of fear. When asked why he was in Haley's car in the early hours of April 24th, he explained that Haley had given him cash and asked him to sell some concert tickets she had. She had also handed over her keys, including those for her car and apartment, so he could retrieve the tickets. Following her instructions, Isaiah said he went to Haley's apartment, searched her car for the tickets, and then entered her apartment, where he found them. He then specified the area where he had discarded the phone. Still, he did not confess to killing Haley, maintaining that he would never hurt her. But detectives weren't swayed by his denials, convinced they had the right man. With the evidence against Isaiah mounting, he was charged with murder, robbery, and obstruction of justice. As Isaiah became the primary suspect, the other two suspects were exonerated. Soon, he was behind bars, awaiting trial. After a mistrial in the first case, Isaiah's second trial began on May 30, 2018. The prosecutor acknowledged that the case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, but he pointed to Isaiah's lies, evident in the interrogation tapes, as damning proof of his guilt. While defense attorney conceded that Isaiah had lied about certain details, he took a different approach. He emphasized that Isaiah never confessed to the murder and that no physical evidence linked him to the crime. He even suggested an alternative suspect, arguing that the authorities should have focused more on Rice, who had since been charged with the murder of baby Jackson. The defense also noted that phone data placed Isaiah miles away from the soccer field when Haley's phone became active around 3 a.m., showing that he couldn't have been near the same cell tower as Haley. Despite this, the prosecution offered another theory. When a phone is turned back on, it reconnects to the last cell tower it was connected to before being powered off. This, they suggested, explained why it seemed like Haley's phone had been moving. Although this was just a theory, detectives remained convinced that no one else was involved besides Isaiah Hagen. Then, a key development emerged during the trial. The prosecution called Isaiah's mother to the stand, and she made a shocking revelation. She testified that while Isaiah was in custody, he had confessed to her that he killed Haley accidentally and didn't mean to murder her. The prosecutor expressed strong confidence in her testimony, asserting that he had never had more faith in someone's words than in those of a mother willing to testify against her own son. This unexpected testimony gave the prosecution a significant advantage. However, the defense wasn't ready to concede, arguing that Isaiah's mother's testimony couldn't be trusted due to her personal motivations. During cross-examination, she admitted that she believed the jury wouldn't convict Isaiah of murder if they heard him say it was an accident. The prosecution countered this by questioning whether she, as a corrections officer, would resort to such tactics to protect her son. After hearing all the evidence, the jury delivered their verdict on June 25, 2018, finding Isaiah guilty. On August 2, 2018, 23-year-old Isaiah Hagen was sentenced to 60 years in prison. While some sense of justice was achieved, the outcome was still a painful reminder of the tragedy and a void that would forever linger in the hearts of those who cherished Haley. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. On a quiet Halloween morning in rural Ohio, what seemed like a typical day for the Lisk family quickly turned into a nightmare that would shock the entire community. Behind the peaceful facade of their home, a series of events unfolded that would leave 3 family members dead and 1 man as the prime suspect. In the northern suburbs of Toledo, Ohio, lived the Liskey family, a blended household of 5. The family included 53-year-old Bill, his wife Susan, aged 48, and their 3 children, Devin, Derek, and William. Devin and Derek were Susan's children from a previous marriage, while William was Bill's son from his first marriage. The family seemed to live a relatively peaceful life in a spacious home situated on hundreds of acres near Lake Erie, close to national parks and wildlife areas. Their favorite pastimes included hunting and fishing, activities that allowed them to enjoy the outdoors together. Susan, who had worked as an office manager for the Northwest Carpentry Training Board, loved gardening, camping, and was known as a loving mother. Bill, a retired Air Force veteran, shared her passion for the outdoors. The kids, especially William, enjoyed spending time near Lake Erie. As the children grew older, they attended church every Sunday, blending into the quiet rural life. However, William had a more turbulent personality. As a child, he was often irritable, bullying other children and stirring up conflict wherever he went. His parents initially dismissed his behavior as typical mischief, expecting it to improve with time, but his disruptive tendencies only worsened during adolescence. By the time William was 15, his behavior had escalated to a point where he had several run-ins with the law. It was around this time that his father, Bill, met Susan through their work and eventually married her in 2001. William resented Susan's arrival into his life. He disliked her presence in the household and openly rebelled against the strict rules she introduced. As the tension between William and his stepmother grew, so did his disobedience. By 2002, at age 16, William had been placed under house arrest for a crime. He had threatened to harm himself, and when the police arrived, the situation escalated into physical violence. William was charged with assault in juvenile court. In 2004, during a heated argument, William struck Susan in the chest. 2 months later, he assaulted her again, hitting her on the head with a coffee mug and stealing her car. Susan, overwhelmed by the violence, pressed serious charges against him. However, William was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder and was deemed unfit for trial. The assault and theft charges were dropped, though his relationship with Susan remained fraught. His father, Bill, made the difficult decision to place William in a psychiatric group home near Lake Erie in Sandusky. Even though William was under treatment, he continued to pose a threat to those around him. During his time in Sandusky, William had multiple violent encounters with law enforcement, one of which occurred when his father was present to pick him up. Despite the treatment, William's condition didn't improve, and he remained agitated. In the fall of 2004, at 18 years old, William's aggression took a frightening turn. One morning, he attempted to attack Susan while she was in the shower. Although Susan managed to fend him off, she was left injured, both physically and emotionally drained from the prolonged abuse. That night, Bill made the painful decision to expel William from the family home. From that point on, William had to fend for himself. The strained relationship between him and his family worsened, particularly with Susan and his half-siblings, leading to frequent arguments whenever they crossed paths. Over the next few years, William continued to receive sporadic treatment for his schizoaffective disorder. By 2007, Bill, despite all the challenges, remained committed to helping his son. He sought legal guardianship over William in an attempt to secure his release from the psychiatric hospital. Bill's hope was to place William in a halfway house or group home where he could receive more appropriate care. Though William's condition could be somewhat controlled with medication, he often refused to take it, believing he was fine. Instead, he turned to alcohol and marijuana, further complicating his behavior. Thanks to Bill's efforts, William was eventually released from the hospital and placed in a relatively free-living rehabilitation center. However, his visits to his father's home remained tense. Around this time, a neighboring family lost their pet dog, which was found shot. Suspicion fell on William, though no proof was ever found. While it was just a pet, the incident hinted at something darker, raising alarm among the community. To minimize William's interactions with Susan and the neighbors, Bill often took him to the family's cabin in Carroll County on weekends, hoping that some time away might calm his son. The cabin was just a few hours' drive from northern Ohio. Bill often took William there to hunt and talk, hoping these trips would ease the tension between William and the rest of the family and improve his mental state. Unfortunately, this only provided temporary relief and did nothing to address the underlying issues. William's dislike for his stepmother remained unchanged, and his mental health continued to deteriorate. A family friend, Mark, recalled numerous conversations with Bill, where he voiced concerns about the safety of the Liska family. When William started causing trouble and had physical altercations with Bill, Bill would frequently call Mark for help. Despite the physical harm he endured, Bill was determined not to give up on his only son, convinced that William wouldn't intentionally hurt his family. On the morning of October 31, 2010, Halloween, Devin, Bill's 16-year-old stepson, returned home around 9:30 a.m. after spending the previous night at his biological father's house. He was getting ready to change clothes before heading to church. As he came downstairs after changing, he encountered William, which struck Devin as odd, as William had already moved out and rarely stayed at the house. The couch had been made into a bed, suggesting William had slept there the night before. They exchanged brief pleasantries, and William asked Devin where he was going, how long he'd be out, and how he was getting there. William's unusually chatty demeanor surprised Devin, as their relationship had always been tense, marked by frequent arguments. Devin shrugged off William's sudden friendliness, answered quickly, and left for church. By 1:30 p.m., after attending church services, Devin returned home. He headed upstairs to play video games in his room. Shortly after, he noticed something strange. The house was eerily quiet. Curious, Devin walked downstairs to check on his mother and stepfather, assuming they had overslept. To his shock, they were still in bed, and his mother's legs were hanging off the edge of the bed. Devin approached and tapped his mother's leg, attempting to wake her. That's when he noticed her pillow stained with what looked like blood. Initially, Devin thought it might have been a Halloween prank from the previous night's party, but as the minutes passed, it became horrifyingly clear that his parents had been murdered. In a panic, Devin fled the house and called his Aunt Lori. At that moment, Devin didn't think to check on his brother Derek or his stepbrother William. Lori quickly alerted the police and rushed to the Lisk house. When law enforcement arrived, they found a gruesome crime scene. In the master bedroom, under the sheets, lay the bodies of Bill and Susan. Bill had been shot in the face while still in bed, seemingly asleep. Susan had been shot 3 times in the head, and her body appeared to have been moved after her death. Forensic evidence later revealed that Susan had also been bludgeoned after she was already dead. In another room, police found the door locked. Upon forcing it open, they discovered 23-year-old Derek curled up in his bed, also killed. He had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, and a bloodied hammer matching his injuries was found nearby. The forensic investigation concluded that the family had been murdered in their sleep, starting with Derek, followed by Bill, and lastly, Susan. Muddy footprints were found around the house, leading to a pond in the backyard. Initially, investigators believed the murder weapon might have been discarded there, but after draining the pond, they found nothing. In total, 3 people had been murdered: Bill, Susan, and their son Derek. Later, during Susan's autopsy, it was discovered that she had been sexually assaulted post-mortem, a heinous addition to an already horrific crime. Aunt Lori immediately told the police that she suspected William, Bill's son, as the killer. William had a history of mental illness and deeply resented Susan. He had previously threatened and assaulted her. Adding to the suspicion, William had been staying at the house the night before the murders, and the family's white truck was missing, pointing further in his direction. Neighbors interviewed by the police mentioned hearing some noises, possibly gunshots, around 6:30 a.m. on Halloween morning, but living in a rural area, they didn't think much of it at the time. They also recalled seeing Bill and William returning from a hunting trip the day before and attending a Halloween party with the family that night. Everyone at the party seemed happy, but neighbors noticed that Derek wasn't present, which wasn't unusual given that Derek and William didn't get along. William rarely stayed overnight at the Lisk home, but because Bill and Susan had been drinking at the party, they allowed William to sleep over after the festivities ended. This exception would later prove to be fatal for the Liska family. Reports suggest that when Devin returned home that morning before heading to church, his family may have already been killed by William. The fact that William spoke to Devin upon his return implies that William chose to let Devin leave the house without harming him. However, William did ask how long Devin would be gone, indicating that he might have murdered the rest of the family after Devin had left for church. Phone records show that the last call from Derek was at 2:02 p.m. the day before the murders. Authorities quickly tracked William down, finding that he had returned to the family's cabin. He had been hunting there with his father less than 48 hours earlier. Bill had taken a week off, and the two had only returned home 24 hours before the killings. A police officer reported spotting a white Ford truck and decided to check the cabin. The truck matched the description of the one missing from the Liska home. As police kept watch over the property, they observed William step out onto the porch, leaning against a post and smoking a cigarette. William was promptly arrested. Surveillance footage from a nearby restaurant showed William purchasing the sandwich. Forensic experts searched the cabin, gathering the truck and William's clothing as evidence during his initial arrest. At first, William was only charged with a single count of murder, which allowed the police to hold him until further charges could be brought before a jury. The jury would decide if additional charges would be filed. When William was transferred from the detention area to the intake unit, he was instructed to wear a suicide prevention suit, which he refused. An officer was tasked with overseeing William. He insisted William to wear the suit, leading to a physical confrontation where William scratched the officer's face. Another officer intervened, threatening William with a stun gun before he finally complied and put on the suit. Despite this altercation, no further charges were filed against him. The police were already familiar with William, as he had been in and out of trouble frequently. In November 2010, William was officially charged with 6 counts of aggravated murder, 2 counts per victim. 3 of the charges were for premeditated murder, while the remaining 3 were for aggravated robbery. William pleaded not guilty to all charges, with his defense lawyer entering an insanity plea on his behalf. He was held in jail with bail set at $3 million. Sometime later, William appeared in court. He faced 6 counts of aggravated murder. He underwent a 30-day evaluation to determine if he is competent to stand trial. The 24-year-old was accused of murdering his father, Bill, his stepmother, Susan, and her son, Derek. If convicted, William would face the death penalty. Despite his history of mental illness, and after being evaluated twice for competency, William was ultimately found fit to stand trial. Knowing he could face the death penalty, William altered his defense strategy. On August 12, 2011, in a pre-trial hearing, he pleaded guilty to 3 counts of aggravated murder in exchange for the prosecution waiving the death penalty. William was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Before his sentencing, William expressed remorse for killing his family, attributing his actions to Satan and his mental illness. William had struggled with long-term mental health issues, frequently stopping his medication, which only worsened his condition. Despite efforts from those around him, especially his father Bill, who never gave up on his son and tried to find treatment for him, the family conflicts continued. Tragically, Bill's love and efforts were in vain, and his life ended at the hands of his own son. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. On the afternoon of March 24, 2015, a 30-year-old man named Aaron Quinn reported that his girlfriend, Denise Huskins, had been kidnapped from their bedroom the previous night. Local authorities responded quickly, heading straight to the apartment where the incident took place. Upon arrival, the officers encountered a puzzling crime scene. The screen near the back door had been slashed with a knife, and the door lock appeared to have been tampered with, suggesting a forced entry. The bedroom on the second floor was in complete disarray, with blankets and sheets piled haphazardly on the bed. On the floor, they found unusual items: swim goggles taped shut and an empty bottle of cough syrup. But what stood out most was a square section of the bedroom floor outlined with red tape, within which a chair had been placed, seemingly positioned to face something. Oddly enough, a camera had been set up directly in front of the chair, yet it was unplugged and not connected to the internet, serving no apparent purpose other than decoration. No fingerprints or other DNA evidence were found at the scene, and no signs of a struggle were visible. When questioned, the neighbors claimed they hadn't heard any screams or disturbances the night of the incident, which added to the overall mystery. But Aaron's version of events made things even stranger. He recounted how he had woken up suddenly in the middle of the night to the glare of a flashlight. Dazed and confused, he noticed a red dot dancing across his chest, something that immediately reminded him of the laser sights used on firearms. Filled with fear, his instinct was to protect Denise, but before he could act, a masked man pointed a gun at his head and ordered him to bind his girlfriend's hands and feet with zip ties provided by the intruder. After Aaron complied, the man tied him up as well. The intruder then covered their eyes with the swim goggles, which were sealed shut with tape, effectively blinding them. Aaron said they were forced to hand over their bank cards, PIN numbers, social security numbers, and even their phones. The kidnapper then used their phones to text their bosses, explaining that they wouldn't be able to come to work due to feeling unwell. Things took a darker turn when the intruder made both Aaron and Denise drink an entire bottle of medicine, presumably the cough syrup found at the scene. The sedative effects of the medicine soon knocked them out. Aaron said that, after he lost consciousness, he was dragged to a chair positioned within the red tape square, and when he awoke, the goggles were removed. The intruder told him not to leave the square, warning that if he did, his girlfriend's life would be in immediate danger. Pointing to the unplugged camera, the kidnapper claimed it was monitoring his every move. To further manipulate the situation, he placed headphones on Aaron's head and played soothing music, a jarring contrast to the tense situation. After issuing his final threats, the kidnapper took Denise downstairs and vanished without a trace. Aaron, still disoriented from the drugs, remained in the square for hours, eventually succumbing to exhaustion and falling asleep. It wasn't until the following afternoon that he woke up, cut the zip ties binding him, and finally called the police. The officers who interviewed Aaron were left baffled by his bizarre story of abduction. Every detail seemed to defy logic, making them question the truth behind his claims. Drawing a square on the floor and forcing him to stay inside it? It felt like the kidnapper had seen too many Western movies and imagined Aaron was someone important. And Aaron had sat there for more than 10 hours without moving. The officers were skeptical. The biggest question on their minds was the motive. Why would the kidnapper go to such lengths to abduct someone? As Aaron struggled to convince the police that his story was real, a message suddenly appeared on his phone. It was from the kidnapper demanding a ransom. "See, I'm not lying," Aaron insisted. But the ransom amount, $12,000, was oddly specific. Whether it was a lot or not, the officers found it strange that the kidnapper would request such an exact figure. This made the police suspicious, wondering if Aaron could be involved in some way. Maybe he had harmed his girlfriend and was now playing the victim to deflect suspicion. Aaron strongly denied this, insisting that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. "How could I have sent a message to myself right in front of you?" he asked. But the experienced detectives weren't buying it. They knew about ways to schedule texts to be sent later. For the next several hours, the interrogation continued. Aaron was hooked up to a lie detector, questioned repeatedly, and even had lawyers consulted, but nothing conclusive came from it. Meanwhile, something else odd happened. The local newspaper received a voicemail from a woman claiming to be the missing Denise. She said she had been kidnapped but was still alive. To prove her identity, she mentioned her favorite band from her first concert and the name of her high school boyfriend. However, her voice was calm and steady, as if she were talking about someone else's situation, not her own. This made the police even more suspicious. Who could stay so composed while supposedly being held captive? The police then began interviewing the couple's colleagues and friends. What they uncovered was a scandal. It turned out Aaron and Denise were both physical therapists at the same local hospital. Even more shocking, Aaron's ex-fiancée, Andrea, also worked there. Aaron and Andrea had been engaged, planning a wedding, but things fell apart when Andrea cheated on him. Though they had broken up, the two still worked together and saw each other regularly. Even after Aaron started dating Denise, it seemed he hadn't completely cut ties with Andrea. Strangely, Aaron recalled that during the kidnapping, The masked man had repeatedly asked him for names, and at one point even called him Andrea. Could it be that the kidnapper had intended to target Aaron's ex-fiancée, but accidentally took the wrong person? Despite this new information, the police remained convinced that there was no real kidnapper, just a love triangle gone wrong. They theorized that one or more people might have concocted this whole scheme to eliminate a romantic rival or add excitement to their lives. Though they continued with formal investigations, deploying search dogs and distributing flyers, their focus shifted increasingly to Aaron as a suspect. Aaron, clinging to his story, continued to insist on his innocence, but after hours of questioning, the police began to lose patience. Legally, they could hold him for 48 hours before charging him, so they decided to wait. Aaron wasn't put in a prison uniform, but he was given minimal food and water and confined to a small cell under constant pressure. Then came shocking news. Denise had been found alive. Media reports stated that she had been discovered in Huntington Beach, over 400 miles away from where the kidnapping was reported. While this might have seemed like a stroke of luck, Denise's sudden reappearance only made Aaron look more suspicious. Typically, kidnappers release their victims in remote areas, far from civilization, to create a delay before the police can reach them. But in this case, the kidnapper had dropped Denise off in an alley near her parents' house. When the police found her, Denise's wallet, cash, and credit cards were all untouched, which contradicted Aaron's claim that the abduction had been financially motivated. More importantly, no ransom had ever been paid. So why had the kidnapper released her? Denise told police that, after being taken, her eyes were covered, and she was brought to a small, quiet house where the windows had been completely covered with cardboard. She said the kidnapper, who wore a black hoodie, assaulted her inside the house. They stayed there for almost 2 days before the kidnapper told her to drink cough syrup, blindfolded her with the taped-up goggles again, and drove her away. Disoriented by fear and the effects of the medication, Denise couldn't tell how long they had been driving, but after being told to count to 20 and then open her eyes, she found herself near her parents' home. The police found Denise's story even more unbelievable than Aaron's. They required her to undergo a medical examination, particularly focusing on evidence related to the alleged assault. Surprisingly, her physical exam revealed no signs of injury, and there were no traces of male DNA on or inside her body. Denise explained this by saying that during the assault, the kidnapper's genitals had felt odd, as though they weren't real, possibly a toy. This led police to suspect that the kidnapper might not have been a man at all. The police began to suspect that Denise might have voluntarily left home and fabricated the entire story to avoid the consequences of her actions. How could a case so ridiculous be real? A kidnapper who didn't want money, didn't want the person, and simply held her for 2 days as if playing the role of a modern-day Good Samaritan. Denise refused to take the lie detector test the police insisted on. She angrily declared, "I'm the victim here. Instead of finding my kidnapper, why are you harassing me?" Her outburst only fueled the officer's suspicion. After all, why would a victim resist an investigation unless there was something to hide? Not long after, the police held a press conference. The chief, clearly annoyed, told reporters that the entire case had been a hoax. He accused the couple of wasting police resources and planning an elaborate kidnapping scheme for attention. Both Aaron and Denise were formally charged with fraud and public resource misuse. Suddenly, the once respected therapists found themselves branded as notorious scammers. Their jobs were suspended, and their reputations were tarnished. The local community turned against them, even comparing their story to the plot of a recent blockbuster movie. But the story didn't end there. 8 days after the couple's charges were filed, a small-town newspaper received a mysterious email. The sender, claiming to be the real kidnapper, mocked the police for being fooled so easily and vowed to continue targeting others. The email contained 2 photographs, one of a toy gun with a laser pointer taped to it, and another showing the corner of a room with windows sealed by cardboard. These specific details were never made public and were known only to the victims and the investigators handling the case. With years of experience in journalism, the newspaper editor noticed that the email was written with an unusually precise legal tone, different from what you'd expect from an average person or even 2 medical professionals. Yet, the police refused to acknowledge the authenticity of the email, suspecting it to be a distraction crafted by the couple. They argued that since the couple had hired lawyers, it wouldn't be impossible for someone to write the email for them. 3 months passed, and the case of the supposed fake kidnapping and the real fraud remained entangled in legal proceedings. Then, less than 80 miles from where Denise had allegedly been abducted, there was a home invasion and attempted kidnapping. When police arrived at the scene to gather evidence, they discovered something eerily familiar: swimming goggles sealed with duct tape. Due to the high-profile nature of the earlier case, the police initially thought it could be a copycat criminal, using the same method to blindfold the victims. However, after speaking with the victims' families, they were stunned to discover striking similarities between the 2 cases. This time, it was a family of 3, the parents in one room and their 14-year-old daughter in the adjoining bedroom. The father was awakened in the middle of the night by a flashlight beam, just like in the previous case, and saw the same red laser dot. A tall man in a black hood pointed a gun at the father's head and demanded that he tie his wife's hands and feet with zip ties. Every step mirrored the earlier incident, but with one critical difference: the father did not comply. Instead, he fought back fiercely, using a bedside lamp to strike the intruder. Taking advantage of the situation, the mother quickly hid in the bathroom. The father then yelled to his wife to grab a gun from the bathroom, though there was no gun in the house, nor had either of them ever used one. The bluff worked, scaring the intruder, who fled the house. The father chased the man outside, where he saw him drive off in a white car. It was only then that the couple realized their daughter had been tied up in her room, her hands and feet bound, and her eyes covered. It seemed the intruder's plan had been to incapacitate the parents first, then abduct the daughter. Fortunately, the parents' brave actions thwarted what could have been a devastating outcome. Although photos of the family were never released, reports mentioned that the father was of Asian descent. Due to the intruder's hurried escape, the crime scene was not as carefully cleaned as it had been when Denise was kidnapped. The police found DNA from the attacker on the bedside lamp, as well as a suspicious Samsung phone near the door. The phone was registered to a 38-year-old Californian man named Matthew Muller. Additionally, the police managed to recover deleted text messages and photos from the phone, including the $12,000 ransom demand sent to Denise's boyfriend. Using the location data from when the ransom message was sent, the police tracked down a vacation cabin owned by Muller. They immediately went there and found a white car parked outside, matching the description given by the Asian father in the second case. Without hesitation, they entered the property and found Matthew calmly sitting in the living room, hands raised, saying, "You finally found me." He offered no resistance and cooperated fully during his arrest. Inside the vacation cabin, police discovered a room where the windows were sealed with cardboard, perfectly matching the photos from the leaked email and Denise's description. They also found a replica gun, duct-taped swimming goggles, zip ties, and cough syrup mixed with sedatives. In Matthew's car, they uncovered a crucial piece of evidence, a blonde hair strand tangled in one of the zip ties. And whose blonde hair was it? None other than that of Denise. What's more, the data from Matthew's car showed that he had been near Denise's apartment on the night of March 24th and near her parents' home 2 days later, exactly coinciding with the times of her kidnapping and release. All the evidence pointed to the fact that Denise and her boyfriend had been telling the truth the entire time. However, when the police showed Matthew's photo to the couple for identification, they both claimed they had never seen him before and didn't display any hostility toward him. They were completely bewildered as to how they had become involved in this mess. So the big question remained: why did Matthew commit these heinous acts? The key to understanding his motive lay in Matthew's background. Police investigations revealed that Matthew came from a wealthy family. His father owned a large accounting firm in California, ensuring Matthew had been financially secure since birth. Despite his wealth, Matthew didn't squander his fortune. After finishing high school, he enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps, becoming a mechanic. His superiors praised his intelligence and diligence during his service. After leaving the military, Matthew was accepted into Harvard Law School, graduating with honors and becoming a licensed attorney. This explained why the newspaper editor had recognized the sophisticated language in the extortion letter. In 2012, a female intern at the law firm where Matthew worked accused him of sexual harassment. The case dragged on for over a year before Matthew settled privately, paying the woman a substantial sum. However, during the proceedings, the intern's testimony somehow leaked. She described Matthew as having deviant desires but lacking the physical ability to act on them, requiring tools to harass women. This revelation caused Matthew's reputation to plummet. His wife of 2 years also took advantage of the situation and divorced him. Afterward, Matthew left the firm and didn't renew his law license, effectively ending his legal career. He later tried his hand at sales but was soon fired for poor performance. The shadow of the harassment lawsuit haunted him, derailing his life. Though Matthew could have lived comfortably without working, he blamed the intern for ruining his career. His anger first targeted his ex-wife, but soon extended to all women. He saw the world as unfairly biased toward women, with both the legal system and public opinion siding against men. This sense of injustice fueled his desire for revenge, to prove that assumptions could be wrong. In the past 2 years, there had been over 30 reported home invasions in the San Francisco Bay Area, but nearly all the women who reported the incidents were dismissed as mentally unstable. Only 2 cases were filed, quickly buried among countless others. Matthew's appetite for humiliation grew, and targeting women alone no longer excited him. He found greater pleasure in humiliating men in front of their partners, not just causing harm but ensuring that they were ruined forever. If not for the brave actions of the Asian family who fought back, who knows how far Matthew's twisted plan would have escalated. After Matthew's arrest, his wealthy parents spared no expense in trying to absolve him, hiring top defense attorneys and even a renowned psychologist to argue that Matthew had severe mental health issues and possibly a split personality. But in the face of all these efforts, Matthew made a sudden decision. He chose to plead guilty to all charges. In his mind, he had achieved his goal. He had shattered people's trust in the police, the judicial system, and even women. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison for multiple offenses. As for Denise and her boyfriend, the fraud charges against them were officially dropped 2 days after Matthew's arrest. The city's police department issued a formal apology, and details of the case were finally released, clearing up the confusion. It turned out the entire narrative about a love triangle had been pure speculation by the media. In 2018, Following a lengthy civil suit, the couple and the police department reached a settlement. They were awarded $2.5 million in damages for the emotional and reputational harm they had suffered due to the police's mishandling of the case. Fortunately, after enduring so much hardship, the couple married in September 2018. A year later, they welcomed their first daughter, followed by another girl in 2022. Now, the family of four enjoys a peaceful life in a small town, having moved past the dark chapter of their lives. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.